Her daughter locked the basement door from the outside. Janet Price, widow, grandmother, and retired administrator, didn't scream. Upstairs, Melanie laughed over wine and told guests, "She just talks too much." By the end of the month, Adult Protective Services would call it confinement. She'd once raised a daughter. Now she was raising evidence. And when freedom came, it wouldn't knock, it would document. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. The pie was still warm when Janet stepped through the front door. Apple cinnamon. Melanie's favorite, or it used to be. She'd wrapped it in 2 layers of foil, padded with a dish towel to keep the crust from crumbling during the drive. She remembered balancing it carefully on her lap, like something sacred. "Mom, you didn't need to bring anything," Melanie had said, eyes already scanning for crumbs on the floor. "I know," Janet replied. "I just thought it'd be nice, first day of something new." That was 3 months ago. The pie was never eaten. It stayed in the fridge for a week before disappearing. Melanie never mentioned it again. In the beginning, Janet believed the basement arrangement was for convenience. "Just while we reorganized the guest room," Melanie had said, ushering her toward the stairs, voice coated in false cheer. "It's cooler down there anyway. You'll be comfy." Comfy meant a cot with a mismatched sheet, no closet, one bare bulb hanging overhead like a forgotten idea. Edward chuckled. "It's a little prison chick." Melanie laughed tightly. "Don't be dramatic, Mom." But by week 2, the door started locking from the outside. "It's for safety," Melanie said, her tone clipped. "You tend to wander. Remember when you left the stove on at your old place?" "I haven't done that in years," Janet said quietly. Melanie gave a tight smile. "Well, still." Then came the light switch controlled from the upstairs hall. Then her phone. "Just while we get your contact list cleaned up," Melanie claimed, tucking it into her purse and never returning it. Meals appeared on a tray outside the door. Lukewarm, often silent, sometimes not at all. "You're not a prisoner, Mom," Melanie snapped once, clearly irritated. "You're just a lot. You talk all the time and it sets off my anxiety. Please, just stay quiet. It's not forever." Janet stared at her daughter, her only daughter, who once cried when she lost a spelling bee at age 9 and who used to bring her every Mother's Day card in a brown paper lunch bag. She tried to find that girl in this version, but couldn't. The door closed. The lock clicked. It sounded different when you were on the wrong side of it. Janet counted the days by meal trays and footsteps, the rhythm of living that wasn't hers. Upstairs, laughter would trickle through the floorboards. Friends over for wine, movie nights, music, all while she sat quietly on the cot, fingers aching from arthritis, back stiff from the mattress's thin support. No one came to visit. No one called, though she wouldn't have known if they had. One evening, a slice of dry toast was all that arrived for dinner. She tapped on the tray. No answer. The next night, there was nothing. She heard the muffled hum of life upstairs. Ella's laugh, rare but bright. Kurt's heavier steps. Melanie's voice, always sharp now. Janet had begun to catalog the tones. Her daughter no longer spoke to her, only about her. Through the floorboards, through that door, Janet had become a project, a symptom, a burden. One night, just before bed, Janet sat up on the cot, the silence swallowing her breath. Her fingers reached for the memory of warmth. The pie, still in her lap, her hopes folded beneath foil like a gift never unwrapped. She no longer believed this was about safety. It wasn't about memory lapses, or light sensitivity, or creating space. This was control. Quiet, sterile, calculated. The kind you don't scream against because you know no one's listening. Then, one morning, after no breakfast tray and an extra long silence, she heard it. Click. Not heavy, not sharp, but unmistakable. The lock. Janet froze mid-stretch. Breath held. She rose from the cot slowly, bare feet brushing cool concrete, and crept toward the door. From beyond, no footsteps, no television, no voices. Just silence. Action. She controlled her light, her meals, her noise, but not her mind. Janet didn't touch the door. Not after the lock clicked open. Not even after the silence upstairs pressed in like fog. Something about it felt off. Too still. Too rehearsed. It didn't feel like freedom. So she retreated, back to her cot, back to what she'd built inside the walls they thought would shrink her. Her world had become small, yes, but not still. She kept a pen she'd found in the laundry basket Melanie left in the corner, buried beneath a faded towel. The paper came from the tray liners. She smoothed each one after meals, folding them in half, writing small and neat along the crease. Her first note. Day 17. Morning footsteps begin at 6:42. Heavy equals Kurt. Light equals Ella. None equals Melanie's asleep. She kept going. Day 22. Tray missing, no knock, crumbs only. Day 26. Music upstairs, female voices, laughter. Melanie said, I caused tension. Tension has wine and Spotify. She ate only what she needed, scraping rice into napkins and saving crusts inside a shoebox from under the cot. The dry air kept the bread from molding. She rationed, not for hunger, but for control. Every movement had purpose now. Every silence meant something. When the light was turned off at odd hours, a flick of the switch from upstairs, she counted the seconds between darkness and the next footfall. When Melanie spoke through the door, it was never a conversation. You're not in trouble, Mom. You just get overbearing. You spiral. I need calm right now. Janet would stare into the pitch black and whisper to herself, you need control. Then came the toast. A single slice, dry, slightly burnt, no butter, no napkin, just a slice on a tray, no knock, no explanation. She stared at it for a long time, then took one bite and placed the rest in the shoebox. That was the morning she knew she had to start planning for something bigger. Later that afternoon, while sweeping the dust from beneath the boiler with a bent hanger, she heard it. A soft knock. One. Just one. She turned her head and froze. At the top of the stairs, through the narrow crack beneath the door, a shadow lingered. Small, light. The quiet of someone deciding whether to speak. Ella? Janet whispered. The shadow didn't answer. She stood, slowly, and stepped forward. Carefully, quietly, she knelt and whispered through the crack. Tell someone, please. The shadow shifted. Still no sound. Then, just as suddenly, it vanished. A retreating footstep. No words. Only the sound of the hallway door closing above. Janet stayed there, breath held, heart beating in shallow thumps, until her knees ached. That night, she lay flat on her cot, the heat pressing against her skin like a second layer. Her joints throbbed, and the air tasted like dust and neglect. But she didn't sleep. Instead, she turned over, reached beneath the mattress, and pulled out the cafeteria fork she'd hidden since week 1, a cheap, dull thing, but solid. She crawled toward the vent cover near the base of the far wall. The screws were rusted, painted over, forgotten. But not sealed. With steady hands and quiet patience, she began working the fork into the first screw. Turn by turn, scrape by scrape, she peeled back the first piece of metal from the wall like it was a secret waiting to be heard. As the vent cover loosened, a small gust of warm air rushed out, and along with it, the faintest sound of voices above. Muffled. Dismissive. Janet narrowed her eyes, breath slowing. If she couldn't speak, she'd listen. And this time, she'd write everything down. She couldn't speak freely, but she could still hear. The first thing that came through the vent wasn't words. It was laughter. Sharp, brittle, unkind laughter. It startled Janet. She crouched near the exposed ductwork, bracing one hand on the cold cement floor, the other steadying her breath as sound filtered through the narrow slits. The opening she'd worked loose the night before now breathed, in pieces of the life being lived above her head. "Seriously," a woman said, her voice high-pitched and nasal. "You just keep her in the basement?" Melanie laughed again, light and casual, like the topic was an anecdote and not her mother's life. "She's not exactly in danger," Melanie replied. "She just spirals, talks too much, says things that don't make sense, and she's so loud. Kurt and I need space." Another woman chimed in. "God, I can't imagine having a parent move in. That's my nightmare." Janet pressed her lips together. Her jaw ached from grinding. The voices above were relaxed, wine-warm and easy. Janet listened harder, filtering every word like water through cloth. Every phrase said something real, something they wouldn't repeat in front of a judge. She slid back across the floor and retrieved her notebook, pages made of reused meal tray liners, neatly stacked, edges frayed. The stolen pen scratched faintly as she wrote. Day 31. Melanie to guests. "She's not in danger, just loud. Says I spiral. House full of laughter, no sign of concern." Evidence. "She lies. She performs. They believe her." Another laugh. "Someone above mentioned a yoga studio." Another voice chimed in about sourdough starters. Then a name caught Janet's attention, one spoken with venom. "Ugh, Mrs. Whitmore," Melanie scoffed. "She was the worst at the office, always reminding people to double-check me. Like, sorry, I don't need to be micromanaged by someone who still uses a flip phone." Janet blinked. "Mrs. Whitmore." A woman from her old job. They weren't close, but cordial. Whitmore had always been organized, sharp, a little dry, but decent. Honest, unafraid of paper trails. Janet scribbled quickly. "Whitmore equals co-worker. Still in town. Ask. Might believe. Might help." She leaned back against the concrete wall, the chill leaching through her shoulder blades. A faint throb pulsed at the base of her spine, but she ignored it. The pain meant she was awake, listening, alive. More murmuring above, a clink of glass, the unmistakable pop of a cork being pulled. Then silence. Except, it wasn't full silence. As the crowd upstairs shifted, laughing their way toward the kitchen or the backyard, another sound emerged. Ella. Her voice didn't ring out. She wasn't laughing. She was responding, quietly, always at the edge of the group, never leading. When a friend mentioned, "Your grandma lives with you, right?" Janet could hear Ella's voice, flat, polite. "Yeah, she's just downstairs." Nothing more. Not a smile, not even a change in pitch. Janet circled her name in the notebook. Ella equals watching. Listening, like me. She sees something. That night, when the vent quieted, Janet lit her flashlight and crawled toward the old ceiling tile above her cot. The tiles were foam-backed, standard builder's stock, speckled like ash. One was slightly cracked at the edge, easy to shift. She stood on the cot, steadying her legs despite the ache. With careful pressure, she pushed the tile up and slid it sideways. Dust fell like powder onto her wrist. Inside, there was enough space for a small item. She wrapped the notebook in a clean sock, tied it with dental floss, and tucked it deep between the rafters, far from sight. She replaced the tile, smoothed the edges. That notebook wasn't just a diary anymore. It was a record, a timeline, a reckoning waiting to surface. As she lay back down, her eyes searched the ceiling. The floor above felt thinner now, more porous. Every vibration, every lie, every laugh was now a signal. And she was listening. No key, no phone, no help. So she mapped her escape in inches. Janet waited until the house above sighed into sleep. It always started with the bedroom door creaking shut, followed by the hushed brushing of teeth, then a toilet flush, and the unmistakable rhythm of a tired household shutting down. Once the footsteps stopped, Melanie's, then Kurt's, then Ella's, Janet reached for her flashlight. The beam cut a cone through the dark like a whisper. She moved slow, sweeping every inch of the cold floor. If she couldn't leave, she'd learn every corner of what they called her space, what Melanie had declared a temporary guest setup, but had begun to feel like a cell. She crawled on her knees, marking walls with a stolen pencil nub, a triangle for each outlet, an X for areas too tight to navigate. The floor plan took shape in pieces, from the cement support post to the warped vinyl tile under the old washer. Then she found it, tucked behind the boiler past a rotting particle board shelf. A narrow, unfinished cavity, walled off with old drywall and crisscrossed pipes. It was tight, but accessible. She slipped inside. Dust danced in the flashlight beam like ash in fog. A dead spider clung to its web in the corner. But up above, near the ceiling, was a window. Small, rectangular, barely wider than her head. The kind designed for ventilation, not rescue. A plastic shade had been pulled over it from the outside, but a sliver remained. Janet pressed her eye to the glass. Through it, she could see the edge of the backyard fence and part of the side lawn. If anyone walked by at the right time, they might glimpse the glint of movement. She needed light. Focused, deliberate light. Back in her cot's drawer was an old makeup compact Melanie had once tossed down in a toiletry bag. The mirror was cracked, but usable. Janet took foil from a used food wrapper, smoothed it over cardboard from a tray backing, and layered it behind the mirror with strips of tape pulled from an old box. By midnight, she had built a crude but serviceable reflector, angled to catch sunbeams through the broken slit and bounce them outward. Morse code came back to her in flashes of memory. SOS, 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. She practiced for hours, timing the flashes with her wristwatch, waiting until noon the next day when the light from the east hit just right. Her hand trembled from arthritis, but she steadied it against the piping. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. She flashed it 5 times, then 10, then waited. Nothing. Birdsong filtered in. A lawnmower buzzed from somewhere down the block, but the slit of sky beyond the window gave no sign that anyone had seen, that anyone cared. Still, she returned that evening, and the next. The third night, as she adjusted her beam with tired arms and dry eyes, she paused mid-flash. Outside, across the yard, something blinked. Once, then again. She froze. It wasn't the glint of a passing car or a neighbor's porch light. It was deliberate, focused, just one flash, and then stillness. She blinked, then dropped to her knees and clutched the mirror, heart galloping in her chest. Her hands shook as she positioned the light again. Tap, tap, tap. No reply, just the echo of her own breath and the creaking pipes above. But it had happened. She'd been seen. The male thought she was locked in, but light found her first. The flicker reached farther than Janet ever expected. A block away, Mrs. Whitmore squinted behind the wheel of her aging Buick as she eased to a stop at the corner. She hadn't meant to linger, hadn't even intended to drive by the house, but after overhearing Melanie at the grocery store brag about how her mom was tucked away where she couldn't cause problems, something in Whitmore's chest had pulled tight like a drawstring. She slowed at the stop sign, and then she saw it. A strange flickering from the side window near the basement line. Not a porch light, not a reflection. Purposeful. Flash. Pause. Flash, flash. Whitmore frowned, checked the time, then circled the block. That night, she returned with her late husband's binoculars, parked further down this time, angled behind a row of hedges. She watched the house in silence for nearly 15 minutes before the flickering started again. A long last flash. She didn't need to be fluent in Morse code to understand distress, especially when it came from Janet Price, whom she remembered as sharp-tongued but kind, always 3 steps ahead at the office, the kind of woman who brought her own lunch, just to save money for her granddaughter's birthday gifts. Whitmore didn't hesitate. She pulled into the gas station across town and used a payphone. "Elder Services," came the voice. Calm, professional. "I'm calling about a possible abuse case," she said. "Adult daughter. Keeps her mother in the basement. I believe the mother is signaling for help. Do you have the address?" "Yes," she replied, then gave it. "I don't want to be named." The voice on the line confirmed the call would be logged. A welfare check would be scheduled. Then silence. But Whitmore, didn't stop there. The next morning, dressed in a plain brown cardigan and old jeans, she walked to the back of her own garage and opened an old shoebox. Inside, nestled among unused keys and a faded photo of her wedding day, sat a burner phone she had once purchased for emergencies. A just-in-case backup her nephew had talked her into. She charged it, tested it, tucked it into a drawstring bag along with a handwritten note. "Stay hidden, don't respond until safe." Then she drove to Melanie's house. "Hi, sorry to bother you," she chirped when Melanie opened the front door with a tight smile. "I was just dropping off some baby clothes for the church. Thought I'd see if you had anything for the drive." Melanie hesitated, unsure, then waved her in. "Laundry's in the back, knock yourself out." Whitmore moved through the hallway, noted the pristine kitchen, the framed family portraits, none of Janet, and turned toward the laundry room. The chute was still there, a metal slide bolted at the top of the staircase, the kind installed in some older models of the neighborhood's homes. She dropped the bag in. It rattled down with a soft clunk. She walked back out, smiling. That evening, under a bundle of freshly laundered towels on the floor, Janet's fingers found something new. Plastic, smooth, cold. She pulled it out slowly, her breath hitching. The screen flickered to life with one green LED and one word. "Hetty." Janet stared at it, her heart pounding louder than any sound she'd heard in days. Her thumb hovered over the keypad. Then she noticed the note, carefully folded and wedged beneath the battery. She read it 3 times, lips trembling. She wasn't alone. Someone had seen her. Someone had believed her. Her hands shaking, Janet powered off the phone and slipped it into the seam of the cot mattress. Not tonight. She couldn't risk Melanie discovering it. But tomorrow, she would use it. She would send a message, brief and sharp, like her old office memos, just enough to cut through the silence. Janet cradled the burner phone like it was made of glass, her thumb trembling just above the screen. No dial tone, no signal bars, but it was on, and that alone felt like thunder. She sat cross-legged on the cot, the glow of the single overhead bulb humming above her. Her heart tapped at her ribs as if urging her forward. There was no time to hesitate. The silence had lasted long enough. She tapped into muscle memory, old habits from when she ran her department without a calendar, just numbers memorized and phone trees handwritten. Fields. Casey Fields, Elder Services. She punched in the number she'd overheard once, long ago, when a friend needed help with her husband's care. She couldn't remember what year it was, but she remembered the digits. She typed, "Janet Price, locked room 222 Ridge Hill Drive, please." Her finger hovered, then hit send. Pause. No confirmation. She typed again. "Basement, no access. Taken phone, help." Then a final burst. "Daughter, Melanie Price." The screen dimmed. Janet frantically jabbed the power button. Nothing. The battery icon blinked once, then vanished. But she stared at the phone in her hand, her breath ragged and sharp. 3 messages. That's all, not even a photo. She stood slowly, wiping a hand across her face, then tucked the phone deep into the seam of the old love seat near the wall. There was a zippered panel in the back, meant for the old pull-out mechanism, now jammed with age. She pushed the phone in behind the seam's edge, covered it with a throw blanket, and sat back down. The room settled into silence again, but this time, it didn't feel like surrender. It felt like strategy. 30 miles away, at a beige government building, tucked between a dentist's office and a payday loan chain, case manager Casey Fields reviewed the morning inbox. Spam, reports, follow-ups. Then he paused. A flagged text submission from a burner number had auto-logged into their intake server. He squinted. Janet Price, locked room, 242 Ridge Hill Drive, please. Basement, no access. Taken phone, help. Daughter, Melanie Price. His brow furrowed. The name was familiar. He checked the system. Sure enough, a neighbor's anonymous complaint had come in 3 days earlier. Now this. He typed quickly. Welfare check, priority, field visit requested, suspected elder isolation. Later that evening, Janet heard Melanie stomping overhead, pacing the kitchen with sharp heel clacks that reverberated through the ceiling. Nosy people, Melanie hissed aloud. This neighborhood is diseased with gossip. Janet pressed her ear to the vent. I mean, who even cares what she's doing? She's not unsafe, she's just difficult and loud. That woman could talk a dog off a meat truck. Kurt muttered something low, barely audible. Melanie snapped back. No, don't you start. You weren't the one dealing with her repeating the same stories 3 times every dinner. I just think, Kurt said, if people are asking questions, maybe we let her come upstairs once in a while. Janet smiled faintly in the dark. A pause. Then the slam of a cupboard. She'll ruin everything if people see her, Melanie shrieked, her voice cracking. Down below, Janet pressed her fingers to her lips, hiding the smile that threatened to break across her face. Ruin everything? No, she thought. Reveal everything. There's a difference. And for once, it wouldn't be her word against Melanie's. Janet squinted at the sliver of light slicing through the narrow basement window, thin as fishing line but steady, predictable. The rest of the basement stayed cool and shadowed, the concrete walls swallowing heat like an empty tomb. But that one beam cut across the floor like it had something to say. She stood slowly, joints clicking in quiet rebellion, and stepped toward it. She could barely see outside. The window was a builder's afterthought, a 6-inch gap near the ceiling lined with grime and fitted with textured safety glass. But light meant direction, and direction could mean signal. She turned toward the vanity, the compact mirror from her old purse, scratched, but still functional. She angled it toward the sunbeam. No use. The reflection bounced uselessly off the ceiling. That's when she remembered the foil. She grabbed the empty gum wrappers she'd stashed under the cot. Using the mirror's curve and foil edges, she created a shaky, jagged reflector. She crouched, knees aching, and began angling it toward the tiny slit of glass. It took her the better part of an hour, angling, adjusting, crawling backwards across the cold floor and tilting the mirror again, but eventually the beam hit just right. The sun caught her makeshift reflector and bounced back through the window in clean, sharp flashes. It. ... dash 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 ... She repeated it twice more. Janet had never been a Girl Scout, but she remembered a book once, decades ago, a story about Morse code. SOS. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. The next morning, she upped her game. From the toiletry bag Melanie let her keep, begrudgingly, once a week, Janet took the small travel can of shaving cream. It was nearly empty, but enough. Carefully, she scrawled 3 thick white letters on the inside of the dusty window. Help. The cream foamed and sagged slightly in the humidity, but the message was clear, crude, but unmistakable. By early afternoon, she heard the creak of the back gate. A screen door opened. Footsteps, light ones, came closer. Janet crouched by the window and held her breath. Through the haze of dirty glass and the shimmer of sun glare, she saw a ponytail. Ella. The girl stood in the backyard, watering the marigolds near the fence, her head tilted slightly, just enough to catch the window's odd reflection. Janet held still. Then she slowly stepped into the beam of sunlight and pressed her hand to the glass beside the word. Ella blinked, looked around. Then, just once, She nodded. Not a smile, not a word, just a single, deliberate nod. Janet raised her hand again, pressed 3 fingers to the glass, and mouthed carefully, "The bathroom. Unlock." Ella stared, then turned away and walked back toward the house, her sneakers silent in the grass. Janet stood, frozen. That could have been it. The moment where things either snapped open or shut forever. The rest of the day passed like a rope tightening around the hours. No meal tray that night, no sound from upstairs. Even the refrigerator hum felt distant, like the house itself had turned cold-blooded. Janet lay on the cot with the reflector beside her, the cream dried stiff on the window, and the compact mirror clutched to her chest like a crucifix. Then faint, so faint she thought she imagined it. Rattled. She sat up. The doorknob moved. Her breath caught. She stood, blood rushing to her ears, legs unsteady. 1 more second of silence. Then, a twist, a turn. The knob unlocked. It didn't swing wide. It cracked open like a secret, slow and cautious, like someone testing whether guilt made noise. Janet stared at it from the cot, unmoving. The knob turned, then stopped. No footsteps followed, just that breathless space between opportunity and consequence. She crept forward, listening for any sound upstairs. None. She reached for the door. It gave. Her fingers shook as she pushed it open just far enough to squeeze through. The hallway beyond was dim, just the small bulb above the staircase casting watery shadows down the drywall. But she was out. For the first time in weeks, her feet met uncarpeted wood. She moved like fog, silent and slow, bypassing the stairwell and turning left. There, at the end of the hall, the bathroom. She slipped inside and shut the door without a sound. The air smelled of lilac hand soap and mildew. A towel hung perfectly straight on the rack. And just beneath the sink, in the curved corner of the vanity drawer, was a cheap plastic case, the same dusty pink as the phone Melanie had confiscated the night she claimed Janet was talking too much. Janet pulled it open. Her heart leapt. It was there. Battery low but still on. She tapped the messages app with trembling fingers. The keyboard felt impossibly small. Still trapped. Daughter locked me in. Basement. Help. She sent it to the last number she'd managed to message before. Fields. Praying the contact hadn't changed. Then she flipped the camera, turned to the hallway door, and took a photo. A clear image of the deadbolt from the inside, with her hand just below it. Timestamp glowing in the corner. Proof, not just words, proof. She wiped the phone with her sleeve and slipped it back where she found it, hiding it deeper behind the spare soap refills. Then she stepped into the hallway and tiptoed back toward the basement. But before she could descend, she paused. Ella's bedroom door stood cracked open at the top of the stairs. Just slightly. For a second, Janet thought she saw movement. A flicker of shadow, maybe a retreating figure. But she didn't call out. Couldn't. She closed the basement door behind her, locked it, then placed the key back in the planter by the stairwell, the one shaped like a ceramic squirrel Melanie thought was charming. By morning, everything was as it had been, on the surface. But not inside. That afternoon, folded into the laundry pile that tumbled through the chute, came a single yellow sticky note. Scrawled in pencil, smudged from a thumb. I'm sorry. Janet stared at it like it was scripture, then folded it gently and tucked it between the pages of her notebook. At the Elder Services office, Case Manager Fields stared at the new message on his monitor, his jaw tightening. He double-checked the timestamp, matched it against the prior submission, pulled up the property log and dialed in the home visit order. Priority welfare check, he told the intake desk. Request full access. All residents present. A knock on Melanie's door came 48 hours later. She opened it with a smile that wilted the moment she saw the ID badge. Good morning, Miss Price, Fields said. We received a report regarding your mother, Janet Price. Melanie blinked, her lips twitching into something that tried to pass for composure. "Oh," she said, too brightly. "You just missed her. She's away. Visiting friends for the week." Whitmore lifted the papers calmly, her voice cool. "Then, I assume you'll have no objection to letting us verify the premises. She and I spoke recently. Her sudden departure without contacting me would be out of character." Melanie looked past her, at Fields, at the small tablet now recording video from his chest pocket. Kurt cleared his throat, the sound dry. "We should let them look," he muttered. Melanie's head snapped around. "Seriously?" "Just for transparency," he said, but his eyes wouldn't meet hers. The air grew tight as piano wire. "Fine," Melanie snapped, stepping aside. "But make it quick!" Janet heard the boots first, the slow tread of someone heavier than Ella descending the basement stairs. She didn't move. She sat in the chair she'd placed square in the center of the room, spine straight, lips pressed thin. Her notebook sat on her lap. The reflector leaned against the cot like a silent accomplice. Her eyes never left the locked door. The footsteps paused outside. Then a knock. "Mrs. Price?" Field's voice, muffled but unmistakable. "Are you down here?" A key scraped in the lock, but before it turned, Janet stood, crossed the room, and slid the bolt open herself. The door creaked wide, and Janet stepped out. She was thinner than before, her hair pulled back in a braid, but her chin was lifted, her gaze clear. "I'd like to speak with someone," she said evenly, "privately." Whitmore's breath caught. Fields blinked, just once, before stepping aside to let her pass. Kurt leaned halfway down the stairs, his face ashen. Melanie was nowhere in sight. Janet moved past them without so much as a glance, the notebook still in her hand, the weight of silence breaking with every deliberate footstep up the stairs. In the living room, Melanie paced by the kitchen island, muttering into her phone. "They're being dramatic. She wasn't locked up like a prisoner. She wanted the basement, said it was quieter." She turned and froze as Janet appeared in the doorway, upright, unshaken, a shadow from a story Melanie thought she had rewritten. The phone slipped from Melanie's hand, clattering to the tile. Janet said nothing. She simply walked past her daughter, the hallway parting around her like a tide, and took a seat at the dining table. Whitmore sat beside her. Field sat across. Janet placed the notebook gently on the table, flipped it open, and began. "These are dated logs of every day I spent isolated," she said. "That's a photo of the locked door. That," she turned a page, "is a copy of the SOS signal I sent. And that's a note from Ella." She slid it across the table. Melanie took a slow step back, lips parting, words forming, but none escaped. "I'd like to speak without her present," Janet added, never raising her voice. Fields nodded. "We'll start there." The weight of it wasn't in the pages, it was in the silence that followed. Mrs. Whitmore gave a single nod, her hand resting lightly on Janet's shoulder like a steadying cane. Case Manager Fields opened the cover with gloved fingers. His eyes moved line by line, date by date. The room around them held its breath. "Each day I was down there," Janet said, her voice composed but threaded with something steelier now. "I wrote what I could recall. Conversations, schedules, when lights turned off, when meals were skipped." She slid a second item across the polished surface, her photograph of the deadbolt from the inside, time-stamped clearly. "This was the lock on the door," she said. "I took it myself during the 2 minutes I was allowed out. The door could only be opened from the outside." Whitmore leaned in. "And I saw light flashing through that basement window at night. Patterned, repetitive. I've seen Morse before. I worked naval clerical before admin." Fields didn't interrupt. He simply nodded and flipped another page. "These," Janet said, unfolding one final slip of paper, "are texts I sent from a burner phone. Someone slipped through the laundry chute. I believe Melanie told you I was away, visiting friends, when I sent them." Fields reviewed the paper, the black ink just a touch shaky, but legible. The message was clear. Still locked. Basement. Name Janet Price. Daughter Melanie. Address. He exhaled slowly. These messages came through our department line. Anonymous, but the address matches the one we're in now. Melanie stood across the room, arms crossed, her voice strained to false sweetness. She asked to be down there. It was quieter. She said it helped her grief. I was just trying to give her space. Whitmore turned sharply. You fed her toast on paper plates and locked the door behind her. Melanie's eyes flared. She gets confused. I was protecting her from herself. Janet didn't flinch. I lost my husband last year, not my mind. A long silence followed. Ella, sitting at the corner of the room, finally lifted her chin. Her voice came so softly, it barely registered. She didn't want to stay down there, she said. She asked me to tell someone. Melanie's head whipped around. Ella! But Fields held up a hand. That's enough. Thank you. Kurt shifted in the doorway, still saying nothing, but his eyes flickered between everyone in the room. When his gaze met Janet's, he dropped his eyes. Fields closed the notebook. I'm marking this as a credible concern of elder abuse, he said. Ms. Price, you'll be contacted by a protective advocate to begin proceedings for emergency guardianship transfer and potential restitution review. Melanie started to speak again, but no one was listening anymore. Outside, the sky had begun to turn. That pale Idaho blue softened into gray, like it had secrets to keep. Janet stood slowly. I'd like to rest now, she said, voice even. Fields nodded and tucked the photo into the file folder. We'll follow up within 72 hours. You're not alone anymore, Ms. Price. No, she murmured, looking to Whitmore and then to Ella. I don't think I am. Melanie remained rooted as everyone moved past her. Her eyes darted, her mouth twitched, but her voice, the one she'd used to manipulate, silence, diminish, failed her. The next morning, an envelope slid through the mail slot, addressed to Melanie Price, bold letters stamped on the outside. Notice of Adult Protective Investigation, open, case, active status. She stood in the middle of the living room for a moment, unsure what to touch first. The couch? The family photos still hanging askew on the wall? Or maybe just the light switch? She reached for it and flipped it on. Click. There it was, her light. By 3 p.m., the sheriff's deputy had watched Melanie pack 2 suitcases, her movements jerky and sharp. She tried to slam the door on her way out, but Mrs. Whitmore blocked it with one steady hand and a flat look. She'll be out of the county by tonight, the deputy confirmed to Case Manager Fields. We've got her on a 90-day protective removal. That's enforceable. Thank you, Janet said, standing behind Whitmore. Her hands clutched the hem of her sweater, but her eyes held firm. Ella opened her bedroom door that evening and smiled shyly at Jeanette. I made the bed, she said, with the soft sheets, the ones you like. Janet stepped in slowly. The room was peppered with posters and art projects, but also the faint scent of citrus-scented detergent and teenage bubblegum. It wasn't much, but it felt like sanctuary. Ella sat beside her grandmother on the edge of the bed and leaned gently against her. It feels better when you're here, she whispered. Janet kissed the top of her head, her lips resting just long enough for silence to settle between them. A silence not of control, but of comfort. By morning, the locksmith had replaced every lock on the house, front, side, garage, even the mail key. Janet stood beside him as he handed over the final ring of keys. All set, ma'am? These open everything. No spares left behind. She weighed them in her palm, heavier than they looked. Authority always is. Thank you, she said, for helping me start again. He nodded, tipped his cap, and drove off. Janet's next stop was the upstairs study, Melanie's old office space. Neat, almost too neat. The desk drawers were locked, but Whitmore produced a set of universal keys she borrowed from her time in admin years ago. The top drawer opened with a sigh. Inside were meticulously labeled folders, Melanie's handwriting looped and confident. Ah, bills. Medical. Janet P. Janet pulled that one. It was thin, but what it contained made her stomach twist. A power of attorney form, Notarized. Dated 2 weeks after she'd moved in. Melanie's name printed as agent. Hers as principal. Signature line, forged. Jesus, Whitmore muttered. She tried to own your voice on paper, too. Janet didn't blink. She just pulled her phone out of her cardigan and dialed Fields. I found something, she said calmly. Something she never should have had. That afternoon, while waiting for Fields to arrive, Janet stood in the kitchen, boiling water for tea. She reached for a mug with faded lettering on it. One Mom. She turned it once in her hands, then set it back in the cabinet, and chose a plain white one instead. Outside, Ella was pulling weeds from the garden bed that had gone untended all spring. She looked up and waved. Janet waved back. Inside, she turned the page on her notebook and began a new list. Revoke POA. File property claim. Check title status. Keep the doors open. For truth, not abuse. The last item she underlined twice. Later, as she slid open the bottom drawer of Melanie's filing cabinet, she found another envelope, not labeled, tucked beneath old receipts and expired coupons. She opened it. Inside, a second POA form, this one older. Different handwriting, her name misspelled, but her signature again forged. Her hands trembled, but not from fear, from clarity. She tried to own Janet's voice. She reclaimed it on paper. Janet's hands trembled slightly as she pressed her palm to the glass door marked Legal Aid of Ada County. The lobby smelled faintly of ink toner and old carpet, clean, sterile, impersonal. But the room held a quiet dignity that soothed her. She had worn her best sweater, the navy one with the pearl buttons, and had combed her hair until it lay flat. She refused to arrive as a victim. She came to reclaim what was hers. A young paralegal led her back to a small office with 2 chairs, a legal pad, and a woman with salt and pepper hair and a face that had clearly listened to too many stories that shouldn't have happened. I'm Marie Alston, she said, standing to shake Janet's hand. Let's get started. Janet pulled out the manila folder she had prepared inside. Forged documents, a copy of the welfare complaint, photo of the locked door, and the handwritten inventory of missing belongings. She slid it across the table. He faked this, Janet said, pointing to the POA. Tried to take everything while telling me it was for my safety. Marie scanned the contents, her brows furrowing slightly. You've already built a solid case for elder coercion. If what's here holds up under verification, we can file for revocation and criminal charges. I want them both, Janet replied. Her voice didn't shake. The paper's undone, and the damage named. Marie nodded. Then we'll begin with revocation today. No one speaks for you, but you. That afternoon, Janet filed the first of several formal complaints. Revocation of power of attorney. Petition for elder financial exploitation. Claim of personal property misappropriation. The final form she filled out in quiet concentration, a list of belongings that had disappeared while she was locked in the basement. Her jewelry box, her late husband's war medals, 2 silver frames, the retirement watch she'd been given after 22 years at the same insurance office. All logged, all gone. Marie handed her the last signature page. Once this is processed, she can't act in your name again. You're officially independent. On record. Janet signed her full name with a flourish. Outside the office, her phone buzzed. A voicemail. From an unfamiliar number. She pressed play. Melanie's voice, panicked, raw, unedited. She's going to ruin me. Again. I was trying to help her. She just twists everything. Now they'll all think I'm a monster. A deep breath. A sob. Then, I should have just left her in that basement. No one would have cared. Click. Janet stared at the screen for a long moment, then deleted it. No hesitation. Some words don't deserve a second listen. By evening, the local Elder Justice Boise group had reached out. They'd seen the news coverage and were deeply concerned and inspired by her case. A representative named Clarice asked if Janet would be willing to be featured in an upcoming profile on elder independence and financial safety. "We want to highlight your strength," Clarice said. "You weren't just neglected, you were silenced. And you fought back." "I didn't know I had it in me," Janet admitted. Clarice chuckled softly. "That's what makes it matter." Janet gave her a tentative yes, not for attention, but to plant something where harm had tried to grow. The next morning, a knock came at the door. Janet opened it to find Kurt standing on the porch, shoulders hunched, manila envelope in hand. His eyes were red-rimmed, his voice low. "These are the tax forms and bank statements Melanie filed. They asked me to drop them off." Janet took the envelope silently. He turned to leave, but hesitated. "I should have stopped her," he said without turning around. "I saw it. I just let it be." The door creaked in the wind behind him. Janet spoke only once. "And? What will you let be now?" 2 days later, Janet gave a statement to the local news. The camera was smaller than Janet expected, hardly more intimidating than a camcorder. Still, its single glass eye reminded her of the peephole on a door she'd never been allowed to open. The young reporter across from her smiled gently, her notepad already half full. "You don't have to name anyone, Ms. Price," she said. "This is your story. You choose what parts to tell." Janet smoothed the front of her blouse. Pale yellow, crisp, she'd ironed it herself. "People think a basement is a dark place," she began. "But it's not the shadows that ruin you. It's the silence, the forgetting." The lights flicked on. She told them about the early days, pie in hand, arthritis in her knees, and the naive hope of being part of a family again. She kept names out, as promised, referring only to "my daughter" and "my granddaughter." The reporter asked softly, "What was the hardest part?" Janet didn't hesitate, knowing they'd made space for me on paper, but not in their lives. A tear threatened, but she blinked it away. "I was spoken over, scheduled, like a chore, and eventually locked out of sight." The reporter's pen paused mid-stroke. "Why share this now?" "Because I'm not the only one, and no one else should have to beg to be remembered." The story ran the following Tuesday, a 3-minute feature tucked between weather and sports, titled "Voice in the Basement: One Woman's Silent Escape." But it didn't stay tucked away. By Wednesday morning, the station's Facebook post had racked up over 12,000 shares. Comments flooded in. "This happened to my mom. I'm crying. We need to do better. My neighbor has her mother locked in a back room. I'm calling someone." Janet didn't read them all. She didn't need to. What mattered was that people saw her now. And that meant someone might see the next woman too. By Friday, her lawyer called with news. "Melanie's employer has launched an internal review," Marie said. "Apparently, they don't find it acceptable that one of their managers has a mother accusing her of basement confinement on local television." Janet said nothing at first, just tapped her fingers once on the armrest. The rhythm of vindication. Marie cleared her throat. "Also, your granddaughter." Janet sat straighter. "She's been temporarily placed with Kurt's sister pending the outcome of the investigation. Neutral ground per child services." That was something. A start. "She asked if she could visit," Maria added. "I said you'd like that." That afternoon, Janet pulled out her will. She sat at the kitchen table, the one Melanie had always used for crafting to-do lists and meal schedules, and scratched out her daughter's name with a blue ink pen. Under primary beneficiary, she wrote only one word: Ella. No middle name, no complications. Just the girl who never laughed but always listened. 2 days later, an envelope arrived in a crisp white sleeve, bearing a logo she didn't recognize. Inside was a small folded card and a letter on fine stock. "You have been nominated for the Idaho Elder Advocacy Award for your courage in revealing hidden abuse, your quiet leadership, and your work inspiring change. We will be honoring finalists at the Civic Center on the 5th of next month." There was a seat reserved, a ride offered, and a line that read, "You are not invisible, you are seen." Janet stared at it for a long moment. Then she placed the letter carefully on her mantel, beside the cracked frame that once held her wedding photo. That night, she walked to the basement door, not because she had to, but because she could. It was open, fully. She touched the new handle, the one that locked only from the inside now. Behind her, the upstairs hallway light spilled gold across the floor. No more trays, no more silence. Just a steady hum of something being rebuilt. The pen didn't glide, it scraped. Janet leaned over the thick envelope on the dining table, hand trembling slightly from arthritis, but her letters were deliberate. No cursive today, just careful block print, as if the weight of every word might one day keep Ella upright. For Ella. To be opened on your 18th birthday. She set the pen down and unfolded the first page. It wasn't a story, it was a reckoning, written in gentleness, a map of how to survive being made small, and how to grow back on your own terms. She started with the vent map. Drawn in graphite, aged from being handled too many times, it detailed the entire basement, with lines of light and pencil dots that marked time and movement. Janet had added small notes in the margins. Creak here. Ella stood here. Sunlight angle strongest at 4:10 p.m. She folded it carefully and placed it in the envelope. Next came the timeline. Not just the dates of confinement, but the human moments in between. The first night she cried herself to sleep. The exact morning she realized she'd been forgotten on purpose. The daylight blinked back in Morse code. And finally, a page simply titled, Things I Loved About You Even Then. Ella came every Saturday now. No knocking, just her soft voice calling from the back gate. Grandma, I brought those daisies we talked about. She'd dig her hands into the garden soil, nails painted in chipped lavender polish, and listen as Janet told stories, some made up, some real, all anchored in a sense of place she never got upstairs. Today, she carried a pothos plant in a cracked ceramic pot. This one's named Rosie, Ella said, setting it gently beside the others. She's dramatic. Droops when she's mad. Janet chuckled, brushing dirt from her palms. Sounds like someone I used to live with. Ella didn't laugh, but her eyes sparkled with recognition. She's not my favorite person, Ella said quietly. But I'm glad I'm your granddaughter. Janet looked over the garden, its quiet rows of lettuce and thyme sprouting with dignity. You've always been mine, she said, even when I was nowhere. Inside the living room, high on the mantel, sat a box made of reclaimed oak. Its contents were simple: the rusted basement lock, a strip of the duct tape Melanie once used to silence the doorframe, and the broken hinge from the vent she'd pried open with a fork. Not souvenirs. Warnings. When Ella had asked once why she kept them, Janet simply said, because, if I don't, someone else will think that kind of silence is normal. That evening, after Ella left with dirt on her jeans and a notebook full of new questions, Janet returned to the letter. She sealed the envelope, wrapped it in twine, and placed it beneath the floorboard in the linen closet, marked discreetly with a carved E. If Ella wanted the truth, she'd find it on her own, without anyone needing to hand it to her. And she would. Of that, Janet had no doubt. 2 days later, Whitmore stopped by with lemon bars and a community flyer for a gardening grant. They sat in the kitchen, legs wrapped in wool throws, rain tapping lightly against the windows. I finished the letter, Janet said, sliding the duplicate copy across the table. Whitmore unfolded it, read quietly, and halfway through, stopped. She didn't say anything for a long while, just kept her fingers pressed against a page titled, I Was Still Me Even Then. When she finally looked up, her eyes were damp. She's going to carry this, Whitmore whispered. Not as a burden, as a torch. Janet nodded, silent. Not everything needed to be said out loud. Whitmore turned one last page and quietly cried, her voice cracking as she said, They'll never erase you again. The basement smelled different now. Gone was the stale odor of dust and old insulation, replaced by the clean bite of fresh paint and lavender cleaner. Janet stood at the top of the stairs, one hand on the new rail Leon helped install, and watched the motion lights flicker to life below. Soft, warm, welcoming. The same place that once held her captive now held something else. Purpose. She descended slowly, her cane tapping softly on each step, until her feet met the polished vinyl plank flooring. The walls, once dull drywall, were now painted a soft green, life in every brushstroke. Soundproof paneling lined the ceiling, absorbing every echo that once mocked her silence. The room had changed, and so had she. 3 folding chairs became 10, 10 became 18. By the time the first wellness session began, the long folding table at the center of the room was surrounded by elders from all over the neighborhood, some who still lived with adult children, others who had stories in their eyes they hadn't told anyone in years. Janet greeted each one with warm cider and a quiet nod. She didn't ask what brought them, she just gave them a space. Mrs. Whitmore handled sign-in. Ella, now 16, took coats with grace far beyond her age. The house, her house, felt full in a way that didn't press or demand, just offered. Janet opened the session with a simple story. 3 months, 1 cot, and a locked door, she said, her voice calm but steady. No light, no voice, and no visitors. Unless it was a tray of food left, without eye contact. The room fell silent. One woman in the back dabbed her eye with a floral handkerchief. But, Janet continued, there were cracks, vents, a mirror, a child who noticed, and people who eventually saw. She paused, looking around the circle. If you're here, maybe you've felt that silence too. This isn't a place for shame. It's a place for remembering who we still are. They talked for hours. Topics flowed. Power of attorney documents, guardianship abuses, boundary violations disguised as help. They passed around resources. Real ones. Not pamphlets, names, numbers, places that would pick up the phone. One man, tall and soft-spoken, spoke of being moved from his condo to a back room in his son's garage. I didn't say no. I didn't want to be a burden, he said. His hands trembled as he spoke. But I haven't seen my old cat in 8 months. Another woman whispered, they tell me I misremember things. Even the bills I still pay. Janet nodded slowly. You're not broken. You're being erased. And it stops here. When the meeting ended, no one rushed to leave. They lingered, hugged. A few asked if the next session could focus on rewriting medical directives. One woman offered to bring banana bread. Someone else offered to lead a writing circle. Before they left, Janet gave them each a small hand-bound booklet titled, Rights Are Not Optional. Ella had helped staple them. Whitmore had triple-checked the legal footnotes. Then, when only Whitmore and Ella remained, Janet walked to the old storage shelf, now a small lending library, and opened the journal. It was a thick, cloth-bound book with a black ribbon bookmark. The first half was hers, a quiet, detailed account of everything she'd endured and how she fought. But the last page? Still blank. Janet tapped it with her finger. For the next woman, she said. So she knows she's not the first, and definitely not the last. Ella reached over and wrote her name in the corner, small but legible. Janet smiled. That night, Janet walked down the hall toward the basement one more time. But there was no hesitation in her step, no dread in her breath. She opened the door, wide, no lock, no barrier, and looked into the light. Sunlight poured through the high window, angled perfectly onto the welcome rug she'd laid out that morning. Birds sang from the lilac bush outside. The air was warm, still. Her steps echoed, not in fear, but in freedom. Janet opens the new door, unlocked from both sides, and steps through into sunlight.